list assessments into conservation action, and well, I'll talk a little bit more about that at the end.
Sorry to interrupt, but there's a glitch in their laptop, so she has to shut everything down for 2 seconds.
Okay, well, that's a perfect timing because we're about to start with the next one.
Thank you.
That's marvelous.
Okay, good afternoon everybody. Like Mia said, my name is Helen Pippard and I'm the Species Officer in the Regional Office for Oceania, which is based in Suva in Fiji. And today I'm just going to give you a very brief overview following on from what Kent has already spoken about, which is where we are with red listing for marine species in the Oceania region. So here's a map of the region that our office is looking after, doing assessments for. It's a huge region, massively marine, as you can see here. It's got a very small proportion of land mass. In the regional office, we're really focusing primarily on the Pacific Islands. So even though Australia and New Zealand do fall in our statutory region, a lot of the work that we do in all the programs in the Oceania Regional Office are really focusing on the Pacific Islands. And as you can see here, that's 22 countries and territories. And I just wanted to show you a few little snapshots of the kind of issues that we're looking at. Like I say, it's a huge ocean with lots of isolated and quite often very small island countries and communities. The human population is increasing, but they are pretty small. You're looking at probably about 8 to 10 million people in the entire region of the Pacific Islands. There's a very high dependency on natural resources for many different things for humans, from relying on species for economics, and a lot of the time for cultural processes that the Pacific Island people rely on. It's also a region that's very vulnerable to natural disasters, and like Kent said, to things like overexploitation and of course habitat degradation. And the impact from alien invasive species is really quite enormous in the Pacific Islands. So we have a number of challenges that we really need to address as well, and the major ones that we've identified are that massive lack in scientific knowledge. We've got huge data gaps in the Pacific, but that's also coupled with a real lack of resources, not just money, but also human and technical capacity to actually do some work in this region. So one of the things that we're working on to try and fill these gaps is obviously improving the information that we have on the red list. So just following on from what Kent said, the complete assessments translate to about 1,800 species in the Pacific. So it's quite a large number, but we're really looking at probably 5 to 10% of what we really know to exist. And again, very similar to what Kent said, we're looking at about 15% of these species that have already been assessed, which have been assessed as threatened, and that's in the IUCN categories of critically endangered, and vulnerable. And there you can see 60% have actually been assessed on the red list as least concern. And in the Pacific, that translates to 17 complete groups. So those are this box. I think these presentations will be available afterwards if people are very interested, but These are just a few of the complete groups for the Pacific, just to give you an idea of the kind of percentage of threatened species that we're looking at. Obviously, birds and mammals have been assessed completely for terrestrial and marine species, so that's obviously a complete picture of what the situation is at the moment in the Pacific. You can see there turtles, 100% threatened. Sea snakes we've done as well, so there's two complete groups of reptiles. And then again, the bony fishes and also the sharks and rays, these are complete for the Pacific at the moment. So we've got those groups of fishes there that you can see have been complete already. But then again, in a similar way to what our current status is for terrestrial species, the gaps in our knowledge for invertebrates and plants is really quite enormous. For invertebrates, only hard corals have been assessed completely, and for plants, we've just got mangroves and seagrasses. And there's really not that many other species that have been assessed in those classes anyway, for other species as well. So these are really important areas that we need to focus on in the future. So at the moment, what we are doing is we're working from IUCN Oceania with Kent and Mia and the rest of their team to complete the gaps that exist for coral reef or bony fishes in the region. So in the last couple of years, we've held workshops in the region, in Fiji and in Palau, to assess damselfishes, cardinal fishes, and gobies. And these have been, I think, submitted, or some of them are still ongoing, but they will be published in the near future on the red list. And in the next year or two, we hope to concentrate further on these coral reef fishes and actually start looking at some of the food fish, so some of the other quite important economic fishes in the region. So we hope to look at snappers, sea breams, grunts, and potentially rabbitfish as well. So that will be the next stage of where we're going in Oceania, and that will be being led by the GMSA largely. So just a little bit about what that red list information can actually be used for, because it's great just to get all of this information together, but what do we actually do with that? How does it translate on the ground? We held the inaugural Pacific Islands Species Forum earlier in the year in the Solomon Islands, where many different experts came together to discuss exactly this. What are the conservation needs in the Pacific, and what can we do to move forward with our knowledge and where we're going. And participants all acknowledged and recognized that we need to urgently increase the knowledge and understanding of the species in the Pacific, what their status is and what the threats are to these species. And to do this, we really need to fill gaps in knowledge. So this is where the red list is really coming in terms of gathering and consolidating existing information, but also thinking about where we can actually focus our future efforts. And also how to use the existing networks to try and get that information consolidated. So for example, many of you are probably members of the IUCN specialist group, so how can we get involved with the specialist groups to try and get this sort of information together? And at the same time, how can we increase that lack of capacity, which we've all recognised in the region, that lack of human capacity, technical capacity, and especially related to taxonomy and also research skills. This is something that we really need to focus on. So just generally, and just following on from that, what the red list can specifically do is to be that kind of consolidated resource database so that we can use that for further work, and also to set research priorities. So the species that we assess that come out as data deficient, these are obviously species that we need to focus on in the future. And also the current gaps, so for example with the invertebrates and the plants, which we really have got very little information consolidated for. But having that information on the red list also allows us to identify those areas where we need to protect the threatened species. So where are the threatened species found? Can we establish marine protected areas? You know, which are the areas that we really need to focus those conservation efforts on? And can we, at the same time, develop recovery plans or specific targets for species so that we can actually not only protect the habitat but protect the species themselves? And again, that can be something that we can work on with the specialist groups and other networks. And as well as that, we want to really use that data at a higher level as well and feed into regional policies and regional plans. There's many regional plans in the Pacific, and there's obviously the big conventions and the IUT targets, which a lot of you will be familiar with at the moment. So that's something else which that red list information is really useful for. And really, in the Pacific, there's a lot of expertise out there, but a lot of it is unknown. So we really do just want to keep working together to collaborate and to really try and get species on the agenda for governments, for organizations, for individuals, so that we can really share our knowledge and really try and get more information onto the red list and move forward with conservation efforts in the region. And I'll just leave it there, because I think some of the other talks will go into similar things. So, thank you.
I think we have time for 1 or 2 questions. So before we proceed, does anybody have a question for Helen?
I guess you can just. Yes, my question is there legislation in the Pacific Island countries to protect species that are threatened?
I don't know of that many countries that have specific legislation. There's policies, for example, there's regional action plans for sharks and for turtles and cetaceans. A few countries, like for example Fiji, has got moratoriums on humphead wrasse and on turtles, so there is actually a ban in sale, take, utilization, etc. But a lot of the policies that exist are very general. They're not that specific to species.
The reason I'm asking is once you have these assessments, then sort of you need a framework within which those assessments can be used, and that would be one avenue.
Definitely, yeah. And again, I mean, we feel a little bit like we're at the beginning of all of this, and really trying to work together now that we've identified all of these priorities. We really need to start thinking about that. And there are these regional strategies. We've got the Roundtable for Nature Conservation, and there is the possibility of inserting specific species actions into these. But apart from the cetaceans and turtles and sharks, I don't think there's any other specific. But Randy might know.
To be honest with you, I'm not updated, but I think for a while Solomon Islands had a ban on holothurians, and did I miss them on the list there? Yeah, I mean, because they're pretty keystone species and something like. Yeah, that's the one I know that in a couple. Tonga did it for a while. I think they've lifted it, but they've actually put it into the legislation. But Fiji, as you know, is not enforced with the humpheaded wrasse or anything.
No. And of
get
course,
it in any private room in a Chinese restaurant.
Yeah. And of course there is, some of the countries that are trading in corals, like Fiji has a quota system for corals, but again, it's not really species specific. So yeah, but that is definitely something that we need to start working towards.
All right, if there are no further questions, then.
Can I just ask that maybe just track something? I'm sure that Yvonne will say this, is the great scope, if we can get people on the ground, is to feed information in from indigenous communities, because they're the only ones that in some cases really know the status of some of these major species.
Yeah, and there's the opportunity for tapping into the locally managed marine area network. They're gathering this sort of data.
And build awareness in those communities too.
All right. Thanks very much, Helen. so let's move on from the Pacific to the Eastern Tropical Pacific, which is basically one ocean. So, okay, so species-specific information on distribution, population status, life history characteristics, and major threats can be used in the delineation of marine protected areas, key biodiversity areas, and no-take zones, and can also be used to inform policies that inform policies that regulate resource extraction. But marine conservation initiatives in many parts of the world have often been undertaken in the absence of species-specific information, because such data are often absent or are difficult to compile. As we increase our knowledge of the conservation status of marine species, we can not only identify where the threatened populations are found, but we can also better refine our goals and our conservation priorities. So regional red list assessments have now been shown to provide a more adequate picture of the impacts of major threats to populations, threats that are not otherwise captured